Every single day, somewhere in your city, someone you went to school with is making a decision that will be worth $400,000 in 6 years. They are not smarter than you. They do not work harder than you. They are not lucky in any way you could point to. But they understand something about the next 5 years that you do not yet. And that gap between what they know and what you know is quietly becoming the gap between their life and yours. Here is the contradiction that should be keeping you up at night. The people who are building serious, lasting wealth right now are not doing it loudly. They are not announcing it. They are sitting in the same traffic you sit in, eating lunch at the same kind of desk, and they look from the outside exactly like you. But money is moving. Right now, as you listen to this, the largest redistribution of private wealth in the history of this country is already underway. The question is not whether you have heard of it. The question is whether you are positioned to receive any of it, or whether it will pass through your decade like water through open fingers. Most of what you have been told about building wealth was designed for a world that no longer exists. The advice is not wrong because it was bad advice. It is wrong because the window it was built for has already closed. A different window, one with a hard deadline, is closing now. What you are about to hear will not sound like anything you have listened to before on this subject. And by the time it ends, the way you measure your own urgency will not be the same. Chapter 1. Everyone around you is getting rich quietly. Every few generations, the ground beneath ordinary life shifts, not with a warning, not with a trumpet or a headline that tells you to pay attention. The shift happens quietly, the way a tide turns. By the time most people feel the water moving differently under their feet, the current has already been running in a new direction for years. Across every era of human history, every period of great economic reorganization, there have been two kinds of people. Those who noticed early, positioned themselves, and captured what the shift was releasing. And those who woke up afterward, looked around at what had changed, and spent the rest of their lives wondering how they missed it. You are living inside one of those shifts right now. The question that should be sitting in your chest like a stone is this: which kind of person are you going to be? That question does not have a comfortable answer, but this chapter will give you an honest one. Right now, somewhere in your city, someone you went to school with just made more money in a single month than you made last year. Not because they are smarter, not because they worked harder, not because they were handed something you were not. They saw something moving, they moved with it, and you were still standing on the platform when the train pulled out. That is not an accusation. That is a description of how this particular moment in history is working. Understanding the mechanics of it is the first step toward not letting it happen again. Here is what the last several years have actually looked like from the outside. Housing prices in major metro areas climbed 40, 50, 60% inside of a few years. Stock indices hit records. Private equity funds, the kind where entry requires connections, and capital most people do not have, quietly absorbed entire neighborhoods, entire industries, entire asset classes. Cryptocurrency created a small number of life-changing outcomes for early participants and a great deal of noise for everyone else. Small business ownership produced more millionaires than most people realize. None of this made the loudest headlines. The loudest headlines were about inflation, about fear, about division. While you were reading those, the transfer was already happening. Think of it this way. You are a passenger on a train. The train is the economy, this specific economy in this specific decade, running through one of the most concentrated periods of wealth redistribution in living memory. Most passengers are asleep. Their eyes are closed. Their headphones are in. The train is moving, the scenery outside is changing, and every stop that passes is a stop they do not get off at. They will reach the end of the line eventually. They will look out the window and realize the landscape looks nothing like what they expected. They will ask when the scenery changed. And the honest answer will be, hours ago, while you were sleeping. That is not a metaphor about laziness. Most sleeping passengers are not lazy people. They are exhausted people, busy people, people who have been told repeatedly and convincingly that the future is long, that time is on their side, that there is always a next chance, a next cycle, a next window. That belief is the thing that keeps the window closed. Open loop. There is something specific about the years between now and 2030 that makes this window different from every previous one. Not just in scale, but in permanence. Hold that thought. The answer is coming, and when it arrives, it will reframe everything you have heard about personal finance up to this point. Now, call up the person you were at that point 3 years back, without polishing the memory. Think about what your financial situation looked like. Think about what you told yourself you would have figured out by now, the savings account that would have grown, the investment account you were going to open, the side income you were going to build. Not as a way to feel bad, as a way to measure something real. Because 3 years ago, markets were doing something specific. Assets were priced a particular way. Opportunities existed in a form they may not exist in again. The version of you that existed 3 years ago made a series of small decisions, some active, most passive, that added up to where you are standing right now. That is not a judgment. That is just arithmetic. The question is not whether you made mistakes 3 years ago. Everyone did. The question is whether the version of you that exists right now is going to repeat the same pattern for the next 3 years. Because if you do, 2027 will arrive and you will have the same conversation with yourself, with the same quiet weight in your chest, wondering again how you missed it. Here is a story about a man named Daniel. Daniel was 31 years old and working a job he was good at in a mid-sized city. He was not struggling the way some people struggle. He paid his bills. He had a little left over. He was what most people around him would have described as doing fine. The problem with doing fine is that fine does not notice things. Fine is comfortable enough to look away. Daniel had a friend, Marcus, who kept talking about a particular neighborhood on the east side of their city. Marcus said the neighborhood was changing. He said the coffee shops were moving in, which meant the rents would follow, which meant property values were about to do something significant. Daniel heard this. He even agreed with it in a vague, theoretical way, but he did not act. Acting required research, and research required time, and time was something Daniel always felt he was running slightly short of. So he waited. He kept waiting. He told himself he would look into it seriously next quarter. 3 years later, a single-family house in that neighborhood had appreciated by $90,000. Marcus owned one. Daniel did not. They sat at the same table at a mutual friend's birthday dinner. The difference between them had nothing to do with intelligence, income, or character. It had everything to do with a decision that took Marcus 4 hours to make on a Tuesday afternoon that Daniel never made at all. The transfer had already happened. Daniel was just learning about it at a dinner table. That is the part nobody tells you about wealth redistribution. It does not look dramatic while it is happening. There is no alarm. Nobody sends you a notification that says, "The window is open, move now." You find out afterward. You read an article, you have a conversation, you run a number in your head late at night and feel the cold understanding of what the last 2 years cost you by standing still. The tragedy is not the money itself. The tragedy is that the mechanism is entirely understandable. The redistribution follows predictable patterns. It rewards preparation and penalizes passivity. And the people who benefit most are not always the ones with the most resources. They are the ones who were paying attention at the right time. Here is what the period between now and 2030 actually represents. Every major technological shift, every major demographic shift, every major policy reorganization creates a compression window. A relatively short period during which the new rules are still being written, and the advantages of early positioning are still accessible to ordinary people. After the window closes, the advantages calcify. They become the province of those who already have enough capital to buy into whatever the new structure is at its elevated price. The window is not open forever. It is not even open for long. But right now, in this particular compression, it is still open. That is the revelation that every chapter of this book is built around. Wealth does not disappear in a shift. It relocates. It moves from the accounts of the passive to the accounts of the positioned. It does not evaporate. It does not vanish into some abstract economic void. It lands somewhere. It lands in the portfolios and the property records and the business equity of the people who understood early enough that something was moving. The sleeping passengers are not poor because the economy failed them. They are sleeping passengers because nobody told them the train was the thing. Nobody told them that the quality of their attention in this specific decade would determine the shape of the next several decades of their life. And so they kept their headphones in. They stayed comfortable. They waited for a better time that was always arriving just slightly later than now. You are not on that train anymore. You picked up this book. That is not a small thing. The people getting rich quietly right now are not doing anything magical. They are not using information you cannot access. They are simply awake at a moment when most people are not. And they are making decisions that compound. They made one, then another, and the results are now starting to look large enough that from the outside it looks like luck, or like privilege, or like some advantage you were not given. But it is not. It is accumulated attention, converted into action, compounded over time. The window is still open. But windows do not stay open, and 2030 is not as far from where you are standing right now as it feels. What exactly makes this decade different from every other period you have been told to take seriously? Chapter 2. Why hard work keeps you exactly here. Here is something almost everyone believes. You believe it. The person who raised you believed it. The teachers who graded your effort believed it with their whole chest. The belief is this: if you work hard enough, the money will follow. Work harder, earn more, save more, build wealth. That is the sequence, that is the promise, and nearly every person you grew up around operates as though it is true. It is not true, not in the economy you are actually living in, not in this decade. Not anymore. The gap between that belief and reality is not a small miscalculation. It is the reason millions of people in their 20s and 30s are doing everything right and still falling further behind the people who started with assets instead of effort. This chapter will not tell you to work less. It will show you exactly why working harder inside the wrong system is not a path to wealth. It is a path that keeps you precisely, reliably, exactly where you are. Now, what makes this decade different from every other period you have been told to take seriously? The answer is not one thing. It is a collision. Interest rates that stayed near zero for over a decade flooded money into assets, real estate, stocks, private equity, index funds, and those assets multiplied in value while wages grew at a fraction of the pace. Meanwhile, the largest transfer of privately held wealth in recorded history is moving right now, from one generation to the next. The rules that govern who receives that wealth are not written in any classroom. They are written in ownership. The window to position yourself on the receiving end of that transfer is not permanently open. It closes as assets concentrate further. And most people are not watching the window. They are watching the clock on the wall at work. Here is the open loop you need to hold in your mind through this chapter. There is a specific mechanism, one that has nothing to do with luck or inheritance, that allows someone with very little to begin acquiring assets even while they are still earning a labor income. You will not hear about that mechanism yet, but it exists. And understanding the problem you are about to hear makes that mechanism make complete sense when you reach it. Think about two people, same age, same city. Call them Marcus and Devin. Marcus gets a job at 23 paying $42,000 a year. He is proud of it. He works hard, gets a raise every 2 years, disciplines himself, never blows money on nonsense. By 30, he is earning $61,000. His savings account has roughly $14,000 in it. Devin, at 23, inherits not money, but a decision her parents made. Her parents bought a modest rental property when she was 12. By the time Devin turns 23, that property has appreciated enough that it is generating passive income and building equity without Devin lifting a finger. Devin also works, but the asset is working beside her. At 30, Devin's net worth is not built on what she earned. It is built on what the asset did while she slept. That is not a story about fairness. That is a story about how the two games work. Marcus played one game, Devin played another. And the painful part, the part that nobody tells Marcus when he is 23 and proud of that first paycheck, is that he was never in Devin's game to begin with. Here is the structural truth underneath that story. Labor income has a ceiling by design. You trade time for money. The amount of time in a day is fixed. Your employer, whether that is a company, a client, or a customer, pays you for the output of that time. When you stop working, the income stops. The ceiling on that income is determined by how much the market values your specific skills in your specific hour. You can push against that ceiling. You can develop new skills, earn certifications, negotiate, hustle on the side. People do, but the ceiling moves slowly, and it never disappears. Asset income operates by different rules entirely. An asset, a piece of real estate, a stake in a business, a portfolio of securities earns while you are asleep. It earns while you are sick. It earns while you are on vacation or distracted or grieving. The return is not capped by your hours because your hours are not the input. Capital is the input. And capital, unlike time, is scalable. That distinction sounds simple. It does not feel simple when you have been raised in a culture that celebrates the work, rewards the effort, and quietly ignores the asset. Bring to mind the person you were at that point 3 years back without polishing the memory. How many hours did you put in? How much did you give to your work, your side projects, your skills? Now ask yourself honestly, What do you own today that you did not own then? Not what you earned, what you own. Because owning and earning are not the same activity. They do not produce the same result over time. That moment of reflection is not meant to make you feel defeated. It is meant to help you see the treadmill for exactly what it is. The treadmill is not a cruel invention. It is a natural consequence of how most people are taught to think about money. You run. The belt moves under you. You feel the exertion. You measure the effort. You track the calories burned. But at the end of the hour, you are standing exactly where you started. The treadmill is not broken. It is doing precisely what a treadmill does. The escalator works on a different principle. You step on. You move forward. The mechanism beneath you does the work. You can walk on the escalator and you will move faster, but even if you stand still, you are still rising. Labor income is the treadmill. Asset ownership is the escalator. Here is the part that should make you pause. Most people in this country, most people in the age range you are likely in, are running as hard as they have ever run. The data is not complicated. Wage growth over the last 20 years, adjusted for the actual cost of housing, groceries, healthcare, and education, has been nearly flat for the bottom 60% of earners. Asset prices over that same period have not been flat. Real estate values have more than doubled in most metropolitan areas. The stock market, measured across the S&P 500, has returned something close to 300% over the same span. 300%, while wages crept. The transfer is not coming. It is already happening. Every year you spend running faster on the treadmill, the people on the escalator move further ahead. Not because they are smarter, not because they work harder, because they are playing a different game with different rules. Now, here is where the false belief becomes dangerous rather than just costly. The belief in hard work is not neutral. It is not simply a wrong idea you can discard and replace. The belief in hard work actively occupies the mental space where asset thinking should live. When you believe income is the answer, you chase income. You take the promotion. You work the extra hours. You pick up the freelance job. And every hour you spend earning more on the treadmill is an hour you are not spending figuring out how to step onto the escalator. The belief defends itself by keeping you busy. Busy people do not question the game. They survive it. Consider a woman named 𝗓𝗢𝗧𝗔𝗡. She graduated at 24 with a degree in business administration and a student loan balance just under $30,000. She did everything advisable. She got a corporate job, paid down her debt aggressively, maxed her 401k, built her emergency fund. By 31, she was debt-free, had roughly $20,000 in savings, and was earning $78,000 a year. She was, by every conventional measure, responsible and successful. Then a conversation with a colleague changed something. Her colleague, earning $60,000 less than 𝗓𝗢𝗧𝗔𝗡, had bought a small duplex 2 years earlier with a modest down payment. He lived in one unit and rented the other. The rent covered the mortgage. The property had appreciated $40,000 in 2 years, and he had started building equity from day one. 𝗓𝗢𝗧𝗔𝗡 had been winning the income game while her colleague was playing the asset game. They were not in competition, but they were not in the same race either. 𝗓𝗢𝗧𝗔𝗡 was not foolish. She had never been shown the other game existed. Here is the closing of the loop you have been holding. The mechanism that allows someone without inheritance, without a windfall, without a wealthy network to begin acquiring assets while still earning labor income is not mysterious. It is structural. It requires you to understand the relationship between borrowed capital and appreciating assets, and how that relationship creates returns that labor income cannot mathematically replicate. That mechanism is the subject of the next chapter. Once you see how it works, the numbers will make the case in a way that no motivation ever could. The window is not closed. Not yet. But the game being played right now does not reward people who wait until they feel ready. It rewards people who understand the rules before the rules change again. Labor income pays for your life. Asset income builds it. Chapter 3. The clock that only runs once. Saving money is not the same as building wealth. For most people in their 20s and early 30s, confusing the two is the single most expensive mistake they will ever make. That sounds like a semantic argument. It is not. It is the difference between arriving at 60 with comfort and arriving at 60 with regret. Saving is preservation. Wealth is multiplication. And multiplication requires one ingredient that no discipline, hustle, or income can replace once it is gone. That ingredient is time, not ambition, not intelligence, not connections. Time. Here is the part that should make you pause. The time you have right now in this specific window of years is worth more than any amount of money you could earn later. You already feel behind. You already wonder if you started too late. This chapter will show you exactly why that feeling is not paranoia, and exactly why the answer is not to panic but to move deliberately starting now. That line from the last chapter is the doorway in. Labor income pays for your life. Asset income builds it. Hold that distinction close. Everything in this chapter depends on it. You can work harder. You can earn more. You can cut expenses, track spending, and eliminate debt. All of that matters. But none of it matters as much as the single decision about when you begin putting money into something that works while you sleep. The clock that governs that decision runs in one direction. It does not wait, and it has a number on its face that most people never look at honestly. That number is time. Specifically, the gap between years, not a metaphor. A mathematical reality with consequences that feel almost unfair once you see them clearly. Here is a question to hold in the back of your mind. Why do two people who earn the same income, live in the same city, and make similar choices end up with radically different financial outcomes by their 50s? You will get the full answer before this chapter ends. But first, you need to meet someone. His name is Marcus. He is 32 years old, earns a solid income doing IT support for a mid-sized logistics company, and has been meaning to start investing seriously for about 5 years. Not because he is careless, because life kept arriving. A car repair. A cross-country move for a better job. 6 months helping his mother through a health scare. Then a relationship that ended and cost more than he expected in a dozen different ways. Marcus is not a cautionary tale about laziness. He is a portrait of what real life looks like when it does not pause to let you catch up. At 32, Marcus finally opens a brokerage account and puts in $500 a month. He is proud of this. He should be. Most people his age have not done it yet. He commits to it, does not touch the money, and 30 years later, at 62, he has something real. Assuming a modest 7% average annual return, Marcus retires with roughly $560,000. Now imagine someone named Danny. Same age as Marcus today, same income, same $500 a month. But Danny started 5 years earlier. At 27, right after her first promotion, she opened the account and began. Same 7% return, same monthly contribution, same discipline. At 62, Danny has over $800,000. She did not earn more than Marcus. She did not contribute more per month. She simply started 5 years earlier. That gap, 5 years, costs Marcus almost $250,000, not because he failed, because time is not a neutral force. It is a multiplier. Every year you wait, you are not just delaying the start. You are paying a compound price for the delay itself. This is where people usually nod and say they already knew this. Maybe you have heard the word compounding before, but knowing a word and feeling its weight are different things entirely. So let us stay with Marcus for one more moment. Go back to the person you were at that point 3 years back without polishing the memory. The person you were at that age, the account balances you had, the decisions you were making with money. Now ask yourself honestly, if 3 years ago you had started then, where would you be right now? Not in a punishing way, in a clarifying way. Because that gap, whatever it is still smaller than the gap that opens 5 years from now if you wait. The window is closing. That is not motivational language. It is arithmetic. Here is the specific reason 2030 matters. Not as a symbolic deadline, not as a marketing number, but as a structural inflection point in how wealth accumulates and transfers across generations. Several forces converge around that window. The final wave of baby boomer wealth transfer, the maturing of a new asset infrastructure that rewards early participants disproportionately, and the compounding horizon that makes the next 5 years the highest leverage period a person your age will ever have. $1 invested in 2025 will have 15 years to compound before 2040. $1 invested in 2030, one will have 9. The math does not care about your reasons. It only counts the years. $10 invested in 2030, one does less compounding work by 2040 than $1 invested today. Read that again in your own mind. $1 now, $10 6 years from now. The $1 wins. That is not inspiration. That is exponent behavior. Once it lands, you will not be able to unsee it once it is there. The transfer is already happening. Every day that institutional capital and established investors let time work quietly, the gap between those inside the machine and those outside it grows. You are not late to a party. You are standing at the door while it is still open, but the handle is moving. Now here is the principle that most people reverse, and reversing it costs them everything. Most people wait until they feel financially secure to start investing. They say they will begin once they have more money, once the timing is better, once the situation is clearer. This sounds responsible. It is the opposite of responsible. Waiting for security before investing guarantees that security stays out of reach. Because security in your later years is built almost entirely by what you do in your earlier ones. The feeling you are waiting for will only arrive after you start, not before. This is the counterintuitive engine of compounding. It rewards action taken before you are ready, not action taken when everything is perfectly aligned. Danny did not have her finances in perfect order at 27. She had a new job, a used car with payments, and an apartment she could barely afford. She started anyway, not with a massive sum, with what she had. And the clock, which only runs once, began counting for her. Marcus did not start at 27 because every year something real came up. And every year that something real came up, time quietly made the math worse. The universe was not punishing him. The math was simply indifferent to his circumstances. This is the tension most people live inside without naming it. You are not failing. Life is genuinely demanding. Bills are real. Emergencies are real. The economy is genuinely harder for your generation than it was for the one before. All of that is true. And none of it changes what happens to money given time to grow versus money that arrives 10 years later. Both things can be true at once. It can be hard and it can still be urgent. Here is where the open loop from earlier closes. Two people, same income, same city, similar choices. radically different outcomes. The difference is not luck. It is not inheritance, not talent, not some hidden advantage. It is the specific year they decided that waiting was more expensive than starting. That decision, made at 30 versus made at 35, produces an outcome gap that 5 times the effort cannot close. You cannot outturn a compounding deficit at the margins. You can only close it by moving earlier, or by investing at a scale that most people never reach. The scale most people dream of is the slow version. The time advantage available to you right now is the accessible version. As this book keeps moving, we will get to a point about how risk works in investing that runs straight against the usual belief. When that point settles, it shifts how you decide what to do with your first dollar. But for now, stay here. The clock analogy that most people use is wrong. They say time is money, but money can be replaced. Time cannot. A more precise analogy is this: time is a machine. Every year you delay plugging that machine in, you permanently lose the output that year would have produced. You cannot recover it. You cannot buy it back. The machine simply runs for fewer cycles. Marcus eventually figured this out, not from a book. From watching a coworker named Priya retire at 58 with a different kind of calm than anyone else he had ever seen. He asked her once, almost as a joke, what her secret was. She did not mention stocks or strategies or any particular wisdom. She said she started in her mid-20s and then just did not stop. That was it. No magic, just the clock running. He spent 3 weeks after that conversation doing the math on his own timeline. He was not destroyed by what he found. He was clarified. Because the math also showed him what the next 10 years could still produce if he did not wait another month. Clarity is not comfort, but it is the thing that actually moves people. You are not reading this to feel good about where you are. You are reading this because something in you already knows the window is real, and you want to know if there is still time to get through it. There is, but only if you stop treating time as something you have and start treating it as something you are spending. The clock that only runs once is running right now. Chapter 4. Inherit nothing, own everything anyway. Money you never had is still leaving your hands, not through spending, not through debt, through time, and specifically through the slow, daily cost of sitting outside a system that is compounding without you. Every year you spend watching the market from a distance rather than owning a position inside it, the gap widens, not by a little, by the mathematics of exponential growth, which is brutally indifferent to your reasons for waiting. The people who entered the market at 22 are not smarter than you. They are not more disciplined. In most cases, they simply had someone hand them the first step, a birthday check, a parent's brokerage account, a family conversation about money that you never got to sit in on. That first step is the one nobody talks about honestly. And the silence around it is costing you every single day. The question this chapter is going to answer is the one most financial advice quietly skips. What do you do when no one handed you that first step? Because the answer exists, and it does not require what you think it requires. That clock from the end of the last chapter, the one that only runs once, it is running right now, while you read this. So let us not waste another sentence on what you did not receive. Let us talk about what you can still reach. Here is a question worth holding for a few minutes before this chapter answers it. Does the absence of inherited wealth actually close the door, or does it only make the door harder to see? Sit with that for now. There is a word that gets used around wealth that most first-generation earners never hear explained clearly. That word is capital, not money exactly. Capital is money that makes more money without your direct labor attached to every dollar of growth. Your paycheck is not capital. It is the product of your time traded directly. Capital is different. Capital is a position in a business, in property, in an index that earns while you sleep, while you work, while you live your life. For most of human economic history, capital was almost exclusively inherited. You got it because your family had it. The door to the compounding machine was locked, and the key was passed down by blood, not bought at any price you could afford. That was the system. For a long time, that was simply the shape of the world, but something changed. The change was not announced loudly. It did not arrive with a press release. It came in the form of financial instruments that most people dismissed as boring: index funds, low-cost brokerage accounts, fractional share ownership, tools that quietly dismantled the price of entry. Not completely, not without effort, but enough. Enough that a 22-year-old with $200 and a phone can now own a fractional position in 500 of the largest companies on Earth simultaneously. That sentence would have been science fiction in 1975. It is Tuesday now. Remember the person you were at that point 3 years back without polishing the memory. Seriously, pause here and bring that time back. What did you know about money then that you do not know now? What did you believe about wealth that you have since discovered was incomplete? 3 years ago, you were a different version of yourself, working with a different set of information. Now imagine 3 years from today, same distance forward. The version of you standing there will look back at this moment the same way you just looked back at then. The only question is what that future version finds when they look. This is the mirror. Hold it for one more second before we move. Now meet 𝗓𝗧𝗧. 𝗓𝗧𝗧 was 22 years old, living in a 2-bedroom apartment with a roommate in Columbus, Ohio. She worked as a medical records coordinator, making $38,000 a year. Her parents had never owned a home. Her mother rented the same apartment for 19 years. Her father worked construction and kept his savings in a checking account because he did not trust anything he could not see. 𝗓𝗧𝗧 grew up watching money get spent the moment it arrived, not out of failure, out of a belief that money was for surviving, not for owning. That belief was installed early and honestly. Nobody in her family had ever had enough left over to think differently. When 𝗓𝗧𝗧 was 22, a coworker named Patricia mentioned casually during a lunch break that she had been buying into her employer's index fund option for 4 years. Patricia was 29 and talked about it the way most people talk about a dentist appointment: routine, slightly inconvenient, not particularly exciting. 𝗓𝗧𝗧 asked what it meant. Patricia explained it in about 3 sentences. You buy a tiny piece of a huge pool of companies. The pool grows over time because the economy generally grows over time. You set it and mostly leave it alone. 𝗓𝗧𝗧 went home that night and spent 2 hours reading. She opened a brokerage account with $60. She bought into a broad market index fund. She told exactly no one. For the first year, she added between $40 and $80 a month, depending on what her budget allowed. Some months she could not add anything. She watched the value drop twice and felt the specific fear of someone who has never had money watching money disappear. She did not sell. She had read enough by then to know that selling in a down market is the moment amateurs hand their position to professionals. So she held. She kept adding when she could. By 26, her account held just under $9,000. Not life-changing, but it was a position. It was capital. It was money that was earning without her labor attached to every dollar. 𝗓𝗧𝗧 did not inherit anything. She built a stake from nothing, $60 at a time. The door was harder to see. But it was not locked. Here is what 𝗓𝗧𝗧 understood that most people in her position never get told. She did not need to time the market. She did not need to pick winning stocks. She did not need insider information or a financial advisor or a trust fund or a wealthy relative with a phone call's worth of advice. She needed two things: a position, however small, and time. Those two things are more democratic than anyone in the financial industry has strong incentive to tell you. Let us name the mechanism precisely, because precision matters here. When you own an index fund, a broad one that tracks hundreds or thousands of companies, you are not betting on one company winning. You are betting on the collective productive output of an economy continuing to grow over decades. That bet has paid out historically across every 30-year window in modern American market history. Not every year, not every decade, but every 30-year window. You are not gambling on a horse. You are gambling that human economic activity will continue, that people will keep inventing things, building things, selling things, improving things. That bet is not guaranteed, but it is the same bet every pension fund, every endowment, every sovereign wealth fund on earth is making with its largest pools of capital. The rich have been making that bet for generations. They simply did not tell you the door was open. Now here is where leverage enters the picture. This is where the chapter gets important enough that you want to slow down and listen carefully. Leverage, in its cleanest form, means using someone else's resources to increase the size of your position beyond what your cash alone could buy. The most common example most people have already used without calling it leverage is a mortgage. You buy a home worth $300,000 with $30,000 down. The bank funds the rest. If the home rises to $360,000, you have made $60,000 on a $30,000 cash investment. That is a 100% return on your actual money, not a 20% return on the home's price. That amplification is leverage. And it is the primary mechanism through which middle-class families without inheritance have historically built meaningful net worth in America. The same principle applies to asset ownership more broadly. Starting small is not the same as starting weak. A small position in an appreciating asset, held over time, compounds. And compounding does not care how large your first contribution was. It only cares how long you let it run. This is the revelation the financial industry buries in complexity. Leverage and index ownership together are the escalator that previously required family wealth to board. One of them lowers the price of entry to the asset class. The other amplifies the return on whatever you bring to the table. Combined over a decade or more, they produce outcomes that look from the outside like generational advantage, but were built piece by piece by someone who started with almost nothing and refused to wait for permission. 𝗓𝗧 is not a billionaire. She is not on any list. At 31, she has a position worth just over $42,000, a small piece of a rental property she co-owns with a friend, and zero inherited wealth. She is building, slowly, deliberately, without drama. The transfer is already happening. Right now, in this decade, wealth is moving out of the hands of people who built it in the 20th century into the hands of whoever is positioned to receive it. Some of that transfer goes to direct heirs. Some of it goes to institutions. And a portion, a real, accessible portion, moves toward anyone who holds a position inside the compounding machine when the transfer occurs. The window for entering that machine at the current price, with the current tools at the current moment in history, is not infinite. Markets reprice. Entry costs rise. The tools that make fractional ownership cheap and accessible today exist inside a regulatory and economic environment that will not stay constant. This is not a warning meant to frighten you. It is a measurement. The window is open. It has been open longer than most people realize and shorter than most people assume. Does the absence of inherited wealth close the door? No, it makes the door harder to see, and it makes the walk to the door longer, but the door is there. 𝗓𝗧𝗏 found it at a lunch break in Columbus with $60 and a coworker's offhand comment. You are finding it here. The first step was never money. The first step was the decision to have a position instead of a wish. Chapter 5. The 3 assets most people mispronounce. Saving money does not build wealth. That sounds like advice a reckless person gives so you stop being careful. It is not. It is the single most misunderstood mechanical fact about how wealth actually accumulates. Until you see the difference between storing value and growing it, you will spend decades doing the financial equivalent of filling a bathtub with the drain open. You made a decision. That is what the last chapter asked of you. If you arrived here, some part of you made it. You decided to have a position instead of a wish. Good. But a decision without a destination is just restlessness with a new name. So now the question becomes, a position in what exactly? The transfer happening around you right now, the quiet, accelerating redistribution of generational wealth, it is not random. It flows through specific channels, 3 of them to be precise. Here is what almost nobody talks about. Most people have strong, confident, fully formed opinions about all 3 of those channels. They can tell you what they think about the stock market. They can tell you whether real estate is overpriced. They can tell you whether starting a business is realistic. They just do not own any of it. That distinction is the entire chapter, but we are going to earn it slowly. The reason most people stay in the opinion seat rather than the ownership seat is more interesting and more fixable than most people realize. Here is the open loop. There is a question underneath this whole conversation that might be bothering you already, even if you cannot quite name it. You might be thinking, if these 3 vehicles are so available, why do so few people actually use them? The answer is not what you expect. Hold that question. It will be worth the wait. Start here. Look back at your ordinary days at that point 3 years back without polishing the memory. Not abstractly, actually think about it. What were you earning? What did your bank account look like in quiet moments, late at night, when you checked it and hoped the number would somehow be different than you remembered? What were you telling yourself about when the real work would begin? When the real saving would start? When conditions would finally be right? 3 years is a short time in one sense. In another sense, it is the difference between someone who planted a tree and someone who kept meaning to. The person who planted 3 years ago has a tree. You have a good reason why you did not. That gap between intention and action, between opinion and ownership, that is where the transfer happens. Not in a single dramatic moment, in 3 years of quiet drift. Now let us talk about the 3 channels. Equities first. Owning a share of a company means you own a claim on that company's future earnings. Not a loan to the company. Not a bet on the company. An ownership stake. When the company earns more, your piece is worth more. When it earns less, your piece shrinks. The mechanism is that direct. And yet most people interact with the stock market the way they interact with weather. They watch it, they comment on it, they have feelings about it, and then they go back inside. They track indices the way a person tracks a sports team they have never played for. The emotional investment is real. The financial investment is not. Here is a name worth knowing, not a famous one. Claudette Marsh was a school librarian in a mid-sized city in Ohio. She retired at 62 with a net worth that surprised everyone who knew her. Her salary had never been impressive. Her house was not large. She drove a car with a dent in the rear panel she never bothered to fix. What she had done, starting at 29, was purchase index funds every single month without exception. She did not pick stocks. She did not watch financial television. She did not wait for the right moment. She had long ago decided there was no such thing as the right moment. There was only the moment she was in. She put in what she could. Some months that was $40. Some months it was $400. The amount mattered less than the fact of it. The consistency was the strategy. By the time she was 60, the compounding had done work that no single decision of hers could have matched. She did not beat the market. She owned a piece of it. That was enough. The lesson is not that index funds are magic. The lesson is that she stopped having opinions about equities and started having a position in them. The distinction cost her almost nothing. The return on that distinction was her entire retirement. Now real estate. Real estate is the asset that more people are closest to and farthest from at the same time. You live somewhere. You pay for space every month. You are already participating in the real estate economy just from the tenant's side, the side that transfers wealth upward rather than accumulates it. The person receiving your rent payment owns an asset that appreciates while you sleep. You receive housing. They receive housing plus equity plus the tax advantages of property ownership. Same transaction. Two very different outcomes depending on which side of the ledger your name is on. This is not an argument that everyone must own a home immediately. It is an argument about the mechanism. Real estate builds wealth through three separate processes happening at once. The property tends to appreciate over time. The loan balance shrinks with each payment, and rental income, if any, arrives whether you are working or not. Three streams from one asset. That is not luck. That is structure. The reason most people opt out of real estate is not income. The barrier feels like money. But the actual barrier is almost always information and inertia layered on top of each other until they look like impossibility. People talk about real estate the way they talk about sailing, interesting in theory, but somehow reserved for people who already know how. Stop. Real question. How much of what you believe about real estate being out of reach is based on actual current research? And how much of it is a feeling you formed at some point and then simply kept? That question is not rhetorical. Now the third channel, business equity. This one gets the most noise and the least serious treatment. The word business triggers two opposite fantasies in most people. The first is explosive startup wealth, the $10 million exit, the overnight success, the life that looks good from the outside. The second is exhaustion, the 80-hour weeks, the risk, the constant weight of it. Both of those pictures miss the actual mechanism. Business equity is simply the value created by a system that generates revenue without requiring your direct hourly labor to produce it. That is the definition. Not glamour, not suffering, a system. A small business with real customers and a modest but consistent profit margin is an asset. It can be sold. It generates income while it operates. The owner holds equity that grows as the business grows. A freelancer trading hours for dollars holds no such equity. The moment they stop working, the income stops. Both people might call themselves self-employed. Their financial positions could not be more different. This is the menu versus the meal problem. You can spend years studying a menu. You can memorize every dish, debate the ingredients, develop strong opinions about what you would order if you were ever really hungry. But the menu never fed anyone. Ownership is the meal. The three channels, equities, real estate, business equity, most people know them the way they know a menu. They can describe the dishes. They have never sat down to eat. The transfer currently underway does not care what you know about these vehicles. It cares whether you own a position in them. While you are forming opinions, someone else is collecting dividends. While you are deciding whether the market is too high, the compounding is proceeding for whoever is already in. The window does not stay open while you get comfortable with the idea of walking through it. Here is the close on the loop you were holding. You asked why, if these vehicles are so available, so few people use them. The answer is not information. It is not intelligence. It is not even income entirely, though income matters at the margins. The answer is a behavioral pattern that feels like caution but functions like paralysis. It is the habit of studying options without ever committing to one. It is the feeling that more research will eventually produce a certainty that never actually arrives. It is the preference for a detailed opinion over a small, imperfect, real position. This is not a character flaw. It is not a sign of weakness. It is a pattern, and patterns can be interrupted. But that interruption, the specific way that behavioral loop gets broken and what replaces it, that is the work of the next chapter. Understanding the three channels is only half the equation. The other half is understanding why intelligent people who know about these channels still find reasons not to use them. That story is stranger and more specific than you might expect. It has everything to do with the way the brain processes financial risk when the stakes feel personal. For now, here is what matters. A position earns. An opinion earns nothing. You can spend the next 5 years becoming an expert on the history of equity markets, the mechanics of property valuation, the theory of business ownership. But if you hold no shares, no deed, no equity stake, no piece of any producing asset, then you have spent 5 years at the menu while the kitchen closed. The three assets are not complicated. They are just waiting for you to stop pronouncing them and start holding them. Chapter 6. Your brain was built for poverty survival. Money you are not moving is money you are losing, not at some future date, right now. This morning, while you were deciding whether to finally open that brokerage account or move that cash out of savings or put something into the index fund you have read about 14 times, the transfer was happening without you, quietly, in the background, like a wire running to someone else's account. The tragedy is not that you are lazy. The tragedy is that your brain was specifically designed to stop you from doing the very things that build wealth, and it is very good at its job. Every hesitation, every "I'll do it next month," every "I need to understand it better first." Your brain produced those thoughts on purpose. They feel like wisdom. They are not. What this chapter is going to give you is the exact name of the mechanism running inside your head. Because once you can name it, you can see it. And once you can see it, it loses most of its power. You already know how to hold assets. The last chapter put that in your hands. The three assets are not complicated. They are just waiting for you to stop pronouncing them and start holding them. But here is what no one talks about. Knowing and doing are separated by something far more stubborn than information. They are separated by a biological mechanism that is roughly 200,000 years old, a mechanism that was never designed for stock markets or compound interest or index funds. It was designed for one thing only. It was designed to keep you alive on a plane where every mistake could be your last. Here is the open question this chapter is going to sit with for a while. If you are smart enough to understand what you should do and motivated enough to be listening to this right now, why does inaction keep winning? That question deserves a real answer, not a motivational one. A neuroscientist named Daniel Kahneman spent decades studying how human beings make decisions, particularly financial ones. His research, and the work that built on it, identified something called loss aversion. Pay close attention, because this single fact explains more of your financial life than any other piece of information you will encounter. The human brain does not weigh gains and losses equally. It weights a potential loss approximately twice as heavily as an equivalent gain. The pain your brain registers from losing $100 is neurologically similar to twice the pleasure of gaining $100. The scale inside your skull is rigged, not by your character or your discipline, by your wiring. Think about what that does to a decision at a brokerage screen. Marcus was 28. He had $1,100 sitting in a checking account, earning nothing. He had done the research. He knew the fund. He had the app open on his phone 3 separate Sundays in a row, and each time he closed it without pressing the button. What he told himself was that he needed to wait for a better entry point. What was actually happening was something far more specific. Every time his eyes landed on the number in the investment field, his brain ran a rapid calculation. Not a financial one, a survival one. It registered the 1100 as a certainty, a possession, a known. The moment he pressed that button, his brain reclassified those dollars as at risk, and the sensation of something being at risk triggered the same neural alarm system that would have fired if he had heard a sound in the tall grass 50,000 years ago. Not danger precisely, not fear. Something more subtle, a strong, convincing feeling that waiting was the smarter choice, that he needed more information. That next month would be clearer. Marcus was not afraid of investing. Marcus's brain was doing exactly what it was built to do. It was protecting a resource. It had no way of knowing that protecting that resource by holding it still was, in fact, slowly destroying it. He kept the $1,100 in that checking account for 14 more months. By the time he finally moved it, the fund he had been watching had risen 31%. His brain, trying to protect him, cost him $341 in lost gains. That is the quiet tax. That is the invisible mechanism. That is what is running in the background every time you hesitate at the exact moment you should act. Here is where this gets more uncomfortable. Loss aversion does not just affect decisions at brokerage screens. It shapes the entire architecture of how you relate to money. It is why you hold a bad investment longer than you should, because selling locks in a loss, and your brain will fight harder to avoid that locked-in feeling than it will fight to chase a comparable gain. It is why you do not negotiate your salary more aggressively, because asking and being refused feels like losing something you almost had. It is why you spend $1,000 on a weekend impulsively, but struggle to click the button to automate a $200 monthly contribution. The spending feels like gaining. The contribution feels like giving something up. Now stop for a moment. Step back to your money picture at that point 3 years back without drifting into anything else. Not emotionally, not professionally, financially. Picture the specific number in your account. Picture the specific decisions you did not make. The thing you were going to invest in and did not. The account you were going to open. The contribution you were going to start. Now ask yourself one honest question. How much of that inaction felt at the time like caution? That was loss aversion, wearing the costume of wisdom. This is the mirror the chapter is asking you to hold up, not to produce guilt. Guilt is not useful here. Guilt is actually another way the brain avoids forward action. It replaces doing with feeling bad about not doing, which creates its own strange sense of closure. What the mirror is for is recognition. If you can look back at 3 years of hesitation and see the mechanism running, you will be far less likely to let it run unchallenged for the next 3. Because the window is closing, not metaphorically, structurally. The generational wealth transfer already underway moves on a fixed timeline. The assets being repositioned right now do not wait. The compounding that begins today is worth more than the compounding that begins next year, in a ratio that does not care about your feelings. What your brain experiences as a perfectly reasonable pause is, in the real financial world, a permanent reduction in outcome. Every month of inaction has a specific dollar cost. It is not recoverable. Now here is what changes everything. Loss aversion is hardwired. You cannot remove it. But it is not smarter than you. It is faster than you. And that is a crucial difference. A reflexive system beats a deliberate one only when the deliberate system is not watching. The moment you name the reflex, you introduce a delay. That delay is where your actual intelligence can operate. There is a technique that builds on this insight, and it is not complicated. When you feel that familiar resistance, the urge to wait, the sudden need for more information, the sense that next month will be safer, treat that feeling as a signal rather than a message. A message tells you what to do. A signal only tells you that the system is running. When you recognize it as a signal, you create just enough space to ask one question. Not what feels safer, but what is actually safer. And when you do the calculation, the answer is almost never to wait, because waiting is not a neutral act. Waiting costs you, every time, in one direction only. In a later section, we will get to a point about risk that runs straight against the usual belief. After that really registers, it shifts every financial decision you make from that point forward. The answer to the open question from earlier, why does inaction keep winning if you know better, is this. Knowing is processed in one part of the brain. Deciding is processed in another. The deciding system is older, faster, and has veto power over the knowing system in situations that resemble threat. The solution is not to become emotionally numb. The solution is to restructure the decision so that the threat signal fires less often. You do this by removing the moment of decision entirely, wherever possible. Automate the contribution. Set the recurring transfer. Make the default action the one that builds, not the one that holds still. When there is no moment of decision, there is no moment for loss aversion to hijack. This is not a trick. It is an engineering solution to a biological problem. Your brain was built for a world where every resource was scarce, and every loss was potentially fatal. You live in a world where the greatest danger is not losing a resource quickly, but losing it slowly, invisibly, through the compounding cost of immobility. The wiring has not caught up to the world. You have to compensate for it consciously, structurally, and without apology. Marcus did eventually move the money, but more importantly, 3 months after he did, he set up an automatic monthly contribution so that the decision never needed to happen again. He removed the screen, removed the Sunday ritual of opening and closing the app, and removed the opportunity for his 200,000-year-old brain to cast a vote on something it was never qualified to decide. His account now grows while he sleeps. The window was still open when he finally walked through it. The transfer is already happening. The only question now is whether your brain gets to decide your position in it, or whether you do. Chapter 7. Inflation is a tax you voted for. Saving money is one of the most financially destructive habits a person can build. That sounds like the argument of someone trying to sell you something. It is not. It is a description of how modern economies actually function. A description that the people who benefit most from your ignorance would prefer you never fully absorb. Every dollar you protect inside a savings account is a dollar you have handed, slowly and politely, to the people who already own more than you. The mechanism is inflation. The reason it feels invisible is that it was designed to feel that way. Once you see it clearly, not as an economic weather event you cannot control, but as a wealth redistribution system operating continuously and predictably, you will understand something important. The choice was never between spending and saving. The choice was always between assets and erosion. Here is the question this chapter will answer before it ends. If inflation is truly a tax, then who collects it? Let that sit for a moment while we go back to something you already know. You were told to save, probably from the time you were old enough to hold money. A jar, a bank account, an envelope in a drawer. Someone who loved you looked at you and said, "Save for a rainy day." That advice came from genuine care. And in the era it was born from, it was not entirely wrong. The world those advisors inherited was one where wages grew slightly faster than prices, where a savings account at the local bank paid 4 or 5% interest, where keeping cash in a safe place meant that cash held its shape over time. That era is gone. The era you are operating in right now has a different set of rules, and most people your age are still playing by the old ones. Return to your ordinary days at that point 3 years back without polishing the memory. Think about how much your rent has gone up since then, your groceries, your car insurance, the price of a meal at the kind of restaurant you used to think of as ordinary. Now think about your savings account balance over that same period. Did it grow as fast as those prices grew? Did the number in your account even feel larger in the way it used to feel larger? For most people between 20 and 35, the honest answer is no. The number might be bigger. The purchasing power behind that number is smaller. That gap between the number and what it can actually buy, that is inflation doing its work on you. Now here is the metaphor that will make this permanent in your mind. Imagine you have a block of ice sitting on your kitchen counter. Not a problem right now. It is solid, it is whole, it is exactly what it was when you set it there. But time is passing. The room is not freezing, and every hour you leave that ice alone, you lose a little more of it. You are not doing anything wrong. You are not making mistakes. You are simply leaving a substance that melts in a room that is warm. Cash sitting in a savings account today, earning 1 or 2% interest inside an economy inflating at 3 or 4%, is that block of ice. You can watch it carefully. You can put a lid on the container. It is still melting. Most people respond to this by saying, "Yes, but at least I still have something." And that is true. Slow erosion is better than total loss. But that logic only works if saving is your only option. It is not. There is a different thing you can do with that water if you move it fast enough. A woman named Clara bought her first house in 1998 for $87,000. She was 26. She worked as a dental hygienist. She had been saving for 7 years, and the down payment took most of what she had. Her parents thought she was reckless. Real estate was risky, they said. You should keep your money safe. Clara kept the house. She did not become a real estate mogul. She did not flip properties or build a portfolio. She simply owned the one house and lived her life. By 2010, the house had dipped in value, and her parents felt briefly vindicated. By 2018, it was worth $420,000. By the time Clara retired at 61, she sold it for just over $600,000. Her original $87,000 had not just kept pace with inflation. It had absorbed inflation and converted it into something else entirely. Every year that prices rose, her asset rose with them. The ice did not melt. The tree grew. That is the contrast this chapter is built on. Cash is the melting ice. An asset indexed to the real economy, a house, a broadly diversified equity fund, a stake in the productive capacity of companies that sell things people need regardless of what the dollar is doing. That is the growing tree. Inflation does not destroy a growing tree. In many cases, inflation waters it. Here is why that is true, and why it matters more urgently than anything you have been told about budgeting or cutting your coffee expenses. When inflation rises, the nominal value of assets rises too. A company that produces goods adjusts its prices upward. Its revenue in dollar terms grows. If you own a fractional share of that company, your asset grows with it. The dollar is worth less, yes, but your shares are priced in dollars, and more dollars are now chasing the same underlying value. The tree does not know the currency is weakening. It just keeps producing. Meanwhile, the person with cash watches their purchasing power thin out like a paper wall in rain. Not dramatically, not all at once, just steadily, predictably, year after year. And now here is the answer to the question posed at the beginning of this chapter. Who collects the inflation tax? The people who own assets collect it. Every time inflation rises and you hold cash, wealth moves from you toward whoever holds productive assets. It does not matter that no one signed a law. It does not matter that no politician stood at a podium and announced a transfer. The mechanism operates the same way gravity operates, silently, without requiring your consent or your awareness. The transfer is already happening. It was happening before you picked up this chapter. The only question is whether you are on the collecting end or the losing end. This is not an abstract macroeconomic observation. This is the mechanism that has quietly separated one generation of wealth holders from the next. The people who entered their 20s and 30s with savings, accounts full of hard-earned dollars, and no assets watched inflation quietly consume the purchasing power of that work. The people who put imperfect, sometimes uncomfortable, sometimes debt-financed stakes into the real economy watched inflation do the opposite. It fed their assets. It grew the tree. You were told to save because saving feels responsible. Spending feels reckless. Investing feels like gambling. Those emotional associations were calibrated in an era with different monetary conditions, and they have not been updated. You are still hearing them even though the conditions changed decades ago. Here is the precise thing to understand. Saving is not neutral. Saving is a position. It is a bet that cash will hold its value better than assets over the time you hold it. That bet has lost, consistently and measurably, in almost every decade of modern economic history. The people who took the other side of that bet, who owned index funds, who owned real property, who owned stakes in businesses that produce real things, have on average and over time won by a margin that compounds into generational difference. The window for entering that side of the bet is not closing the way a sale closes. It is closing the way a tide goes out. Slowly at first, then faster than you expected. And by the time the water is low enough that you can see what the tide was covering, the people who moved early have already built on dry ground. Before long, we will get to a point about risk that runs straight against the usual belief. Once that becomes real to you, it shifts exactly how you think about the word safe. But right now, the thing that needs to land is simpler and older and more important than risk theory. Doing nothing is a choice. Holding cash is a choice. Every month you delay putting money into something the real economy can grow is a month you have voted, without realizing it, for the inflation tax to collect from you. The vote happens by inaction. The ballot was cast the moment you left money in a place where it cannot grow at the rate the economy inflates. Most people never get angry about this because they never see it clearly. They see their balance staying the same or growing slightly, and they feel okay. They do not see the purchasing power. They do not see the invisible column that tracks what those dollars actually buy. If they could see that column, if it showed up on their banking app right next to the balance, the number would move in the wrong direction every single month they held cash, earning less than inflation. Some months a little, some months a lot, never the other direction. You have earned money. You have given hours, sleep, attention, and effort to earn it. The question now is whether you let that effort quietly melt, or whether you plant it in something that can grow while you do other things with your life. The ice cube will melt whether you watch it or not. The only question left is this: what happens to the water if you let it pool in the right place? Chapter 8. Small positions beat perfect plans every time. Water pools where it is allowed to settle. That is the answer to the question the last chapter left you holding. Not where conditions are perfect. Not where the angle is precise and the surface is smooth and everything is arranged exactly right. Water pools wherever it is allowed to stop moving. And that quiet, unremarkable fact is the most important thing you will understand about building wealth before the window closes. Right now, money is leaving your life, not in a single dramatic moment. In thin, daily slices. The $60 you spend on nothing you can name by Friday. The $47 that disappears between the 1st and the 15th of every month, gone so quietly you never form a conscious thought about it. That money is not just absent from your pocket. It is absent from every future version of itself. The $30 position you did not open 3 years ago is not $30 lost. It is everything that $30 would have become, compounding forward into years you have not lived yet. The loss is not loud. It never announces itself. It accumulates in silence, and it will keep accumulating for exactly as long as you wait for the right moment to begin. The question is not whether you are losing ground. You are. The question is what is causing it. It is not bad luck. It is not the economy. It is not the fact that no one taught you this when you were young. The invisible mechanism is simpler and more personal than any of those things. It is the belief that starting small does not count. Picture your ordinary days at that point 3 years back without polishing the memory. Not in broad terms, think specifically. What was in your bank account? What you told yourself you were planning to do differently. What you were waiting for before you felt ready to act. 3 years of waiting did not produce readiness. 3 years of waiting produced 3 more years of distance between you and where you are trying to go. That is not an accusation. That is the pattern, and recognizing the pattern is the beginning of breaking it. Here is the open loop you should hold in your mind as this chapter unfolds. Why do people with access to information, people exactly like you, people who know the market exists, who have heard about index funds and compound interest and the basic arithmetic of early investing, why do those people still not start? The answer is not ignorance. Hold that question. The answer is coming, and when it arrives, it will change what you do next. There is a version of perfectionism that nobody talks about because it wears the clothing of responsibility. It sounds like, I want to do this right. It sounds like, I am still doing my research. It sounds like, when I have a real amount to invest, I will start. This version of perfectionism is not caution. It is procrastination, and it is costing you compounding years that do not come back. In Chapter 6, you sat with loss aversion, the way the fear of losing what little you have keeps you from deploying it. This chapter builds directly on that. Perfectionism and loss aversion are cousins. They come from the same family of beliefs. Loss aversion says, I cannot risk what I have. Perfectionism says, I cannot start until I have more to risk. until I know exactly how to deploy it, until the conditions are favorable, until I have read one more article, until the market pulls back, until my situation stabilizes. Between them, they form a wall that looks like wisdom from the inside and looks like a cage from the outside. Meet Dara. Dara was 26, working as a billing coordinator for a mid-sized medical office, making $38,000 a year. She had heard about investing the way most people hear about investing, vaguely, repeatedly, with a sense that it was important, but also that it was for people who understood things she did not understand yet. She had a spreadsheet she kept updating with different allocation strategies. She had bookmarks to 6 different financial education websites. She had a note in her phone that read, "Start when you hit $2,000 in savings." The $2,000 threshold kept moving. When she hit it, her car needed work. When she hit it again, she moved apartments. When she hit it a third time, she decided the market was too volatile and she should wait for it to calm down. Then a coworker named Priya, 4 years younger than Dara, someone Dara had always assumed knew less about money, mentioned casually that she had been putting $40 a month into an index fund since she was 22. No strategy, no spreadsheet. $40 a month every month automatically into the simplest possible instrument. Priya did not wait for $2,000. She never waited at all. She just started with what she had. Dara sat with that for a long time. Not the math she had known for years. What she sat with was the fact that Priya had 4 years of compounding that Dara did not have, and it had cost Priya nothing except the decision to begin. The math, though, the math is worth stating plainly. $50 a month, invested at a 7% average annual return over 10 years, becomes approximately $8,700. You did not need to time the market. You did not need a sophisticated allocation model. You needed $50 a month, 10 years, and the decision not to stop. That number is not staggering on its own, but $50 a month started at 25 looks different at 35 than $50 a month started at 32. The 3 years of difference between those two starting points is not a small number. It is thousands of dollars of compounded distance that grows wider every single year you do not act. And zero returns zero. Indefinitely. A perfect plan that never launches returns exactly what it has returned every day you have been building it. Nothing. The window in this book is real. The transfer of wealth already underway is not a metaphor. It is happening now in the structure of markets, in asset prices, in the way early holders of almost every appreciating asset class have pulled further from people who are still preparing to enter. The window does not close all at once. It closes in increments quietly in the same way the cost of not starting accumulates, not in one dramatic moment, but in thousands of small, invisible daily increments. Every one of those increments that passes while you are still optimizing your plan is an increment you will not recover. Here is what small positions actually do that perfect plans cannot. A small position puts you inside the market. Once you are inside, you watch differently. You read differently. You develop what no amount of prior research can manufacture, the emotional experience of having skin in the game. Tiny amounts teach you things that theoretical knowledge cannot touch. How it feels to watch something you own lose 2% in a week. How it feels to see it recover. How it feels to leave it alone. These are not things you can study. They are things you can only live through, and you can only live through them if you start. A small position also removes the false pressure of the perfect entry point. When you are holding out for ideal conditions, every market movement becomes evidence that now is the wrong time. The market goes up. It is too high. You have already missed the entry. The market goes down, it is unstable, you should wait for it to settle. The market stays flat, something must be coming, you should hold off. Every condition becomes a reason to wait because waiting is the actual goal and the market is just the excuse. A small position breaks that logic. You are already in. The entry point is behind you. Now the only question is what comes next. Now answer the question this chapter opened with. Why do people who know all of this still not start? Because starting small feels like an admission. It feels like admitting that this is all you can do. It feels like admitting you are not where you thought you would be by now, that your position in life is as modest as the $50 transaction you are about to authorize. The barrier is not financial. The barrier is the story you are telling yourself about what beginning looks like, and whether beginning at this scale is something you are willing to be seen doing, even by yourself. But here is the contradiction hiding inside that story. The person who starts with $50 is not admitting defeat. They are doing the exact thing that will separate them from the person who waited. 5 years from now, the person with $50 a month and the discipline to leave it alone will have something. The person with the perfect plan will have a better plan. The transfer is already happening. While you are refining your approach, capital is compressing into the hands of people who acted on incomplete information years ago. They were not smarter than you. They were not more prepared. They were simply earlier. You cannot be earlier than them, but you can be earlier than the version of yourself who waits 1 more year. Down the line in this book, we will get to a point about the relationship between risk and return that runs straight against the usual belief. When that idea snaps into focus, it shifts where you put your first dollar. For now, hold one thing. Perfectionism is procrastination in a suit. It is intelligent sounding, it is well researched, and it will keep you exactly where you are for exactly as long as you let it run. The imperfect start, the one that is too small, too uncertain, too early, too underdeveloped, that imperfect start is the one that compounds. The perfect plan that never launches does not. A $50 position entered today outperforms 0. Not eventually. Not under favorable conditions. Not if the market cooperates. Indefinitely. What would you do right now if you stopped waiting for the right amount? Chapter 9. Who gets rich when markets crash? Saving money during a crash is the single worst financial decision you can make. That sounds like something a reckless gambler says before losing everything. It is not. It is what history says, clearly and repeatedly, to anyone willing to look at what actually happened to wealth in the 12 months after every major market collapse in the last 100 years. The people who held cash and waited for safety, they lost. Not always in the dramatic way. Sometimes the loss was quiet, invisible, measured only in the distance that grew between them and the people who moved while everyone else froze. So if you have been told that the smart play during a crash is to protect what you have been handed a half-truth dressed as wisdom. This chapter is about the other half. It is about what the market looks like to someone who is ready when fear is loudest. And once you see it clearly, you will not be able to unsee it. The only question you should be asking right now is whether you want to be the one buying or the one selling cheap. What would you do right now if you stopped waiting for the right amount? That question ended the last chapter hanging in the air because it was not rhetorical. It was a door, and this chapter walks you through it. Here is what nobody tells you when they explain a market crash. They show you the chart going down. They name the percentage drops. They interview the people who lost money. What they never show you is the other side of every single one of those transactions. Because when someone sells in a panic, someone else is buying. When a stock drops 40% in 6 weeks, the shares do not disappear. They transfer. They move from the hand of the frightened into the hand of the prepared. That transfer is the engine of every wealth-building story that comes out of a crisis, and it is happening whether you participate or not. This is the open loop you need to carry for the next few minutes. You already know that crashes are bad. You feel it when they happen, the news gets loud, your stomach tightens, people you respect start talking about worst-case scenarios. But there is a number buried inside every crash that almost no one talks about. Not the number of how much was lost, the number of how much wealth changed hands. Hold that question. Come back to it. Consider what happened in September of 2008. The financial system was cracking in real time. Banks that had existed for over a century were gone inside a week. The S&P 500 fell over 50% from its peak. Retirement accounts looked like they had been set on fire. Every major financial news outlet ran the same message: get out, protect yourself. This is not the time to invest. Diane was 31 years old and working as a purchasing manager at a manufacturing company in Cincinnati. She had $18,000 saved. Not a fortune, not enough to feel invincible. She had been building that money for 4 years by cutting expenses with a precision that most people find uncomfortable. No new car, rented a room in a house with 2 other people, ate at home almost every night. When the crash hit, her coworkers were moving money out of their 401k accounts. Her brother-in-law called to tell her to hold cash. Her own mother said the market was broken and might not recover for a decade. Diane listened to all of it. Then she opened her brokerage account and started buying index funds. She bought in October 2008. She bought again in November. She bought a smaller amount in January of 2009 because her savings were thinning. By March 2009, the actual bottom of that crash, she had deployed almost everything she had. She did not time it perfectly. She bought on the way down and she bought near the bottom without knowing it was the bottom. But here is what happened next. The S&P 500 returned over 26% in 2009 alone. By 2013, the assets she bought during the panic had more than doubled. She did not get lucky. She got positioned. The same people who told her to wait were still waiting in 2011, 2012, holding cash, watching the market climb back past where it was before the crash, feeling like they had missed a train that left without warning. They had not missed an accident. They had missed a sale. The largest sale on productive assets that their generation had seen up to that point. Now stop for a moment. Think about where you were in 2008 or 2009. Think about how old you were, what you were doing with your money, what the adults in your life were telling you. Were you being taught to hold, to protect, to stay safe? Most people were. The message of caution gets passed down like a tradition, hand to hand, generation to generation, and it costs every new generation real money. Not because caution is wrong in every context, but because caution applied at exactly the wrong moment, when assets are discounted and fear is highest, functions exactly like selling cheap and waiting to buy back at full price. That is what most people do, just in slow motion. What Diane understood almost instinctively was the simple arithmetic of a crash. If you believe the economy will exist in 10 years, and you can buy a piece of that economy at half price today, there is no rational argument for waiting. The risk is not buying in a down market. The risk is having no position when the market recovers. But here is the part that sharpens that lesson into something you cannot ignore. Diane did it again in 2020. She was 43 now. She had built up her investment accounts over the intervening decade. She also kept a specific cash reserve, not her emergency fund, something separate, money she thought of as dry powder, ready to deploy when conditions turned. March 2020 arrived. COVID collapsed the market faster than any crash in the modern era. The S&P dropped 34% in 33 days. That pace of decline had not been seen since 1929. The news was not just about money that time. It was about whether civilization as people knew it was stopping. That is not an exaggeration of the mood. That is what people were saying out loud. Diane did not freeze. She moved the dry powder she had been sitting on for 18 months into the market across 3 separate purchases in March and April of 2020. The S&P 500 returned over 100% in the 24 months following that bottom. She did not need perfect timing. She needed conviction, preparation, and the specific habit of keeping money in reserve precisely for moments when everyone around her was running the other direction. 2 crashes, 2 deployments, 1 consistent behavior across 12 years. Diane is not on any list of famous investors. She does not manage a hedge fund. She is an ordinary person who understood one thing more clearly than the people around her, that a crash is not a moment to survive. It is a moment to use. Here is the number that was missing from every crash story you ever heard. In the 12 months following the 2009 market bottom, households that held invested assets saw average portfolio appreciation of 26% or more. Households that held only cash lost purchasing power to inflation and sat out the entire recovery. The gap between those 2 groups widened by tens of thousands of dollars in a single year, not because one group worked harder, not because one group was smarter, but because one group was positioned and one group was not. That gap is what people mean when they talk about wealth transfer. They mean that money does not disappear in a crash. It redistributes. It leaves the hands of the panicked and lands in the hands of the calm. It leaves the accounts of the uninformed and enters the portfolios of the patient. Every crash in modern financial history has done this. Every one, without exception. This is where the closing window becomes impossible to ignore. You are living in a period where the next significant market correction is not a matter of if. It is a matter of when, and whether you have built a position that lets you move toward it instead of away from it. The people who build wealth between now and 2030 are not going to be the people who predicted the crash. They are going to be the people who were already holding assets when it arrived, who had dry powder ready, and who understood that the loudest moment of fear is historically the most valuable moment to act. The transfer is already happening. It happened in 2008. It happened in 2020. It will happen again. And each time it does, the window to enter on favorable terms opens and closes faster than the news cycle can explain it. By the time the all clear is sounded, the prices have already climbed. The people who profited have already bought. You are reading the story of a sale that already closed. The question is whether you are in the next one. Now close that open loop. The number that matters in a crash is not the percentage that markets fell. It is the volume of assets that changed ownership. In the 3 months surrounding the 2009 bottom, institutional and individual buyers who moved into equities collectively acquired positions worth trillions of dollars at generational discounts. The amount lost in headline numbers and the amount transferred in actual ownership are not the same story. Most people only ever hear the first one. You need to become someone who hears both. There are 3 things that separate a buyer in a crash from a bystander: an existing position in assets before the crash begins, a cash reserve held specifically for buying during corrections, and the internal clarity to act when every instinct trained by years of cautionary advice is screaming at you to stop. The third one is the hardest, and it is the one this whole book has been quietly building toward. Diane did not wake up in October 2008 and become a different person. She had already decided. The decision happened quietly in ordinary months when the market was boring and nothing felt urgent. The crash just revealed the decision she had already made. The question that is going to follow you into the next chapter is not whether a crash is coming. The question is who you will be when it does. Chapter 10. The automation dividend nobody claimed. Something is being siphoned away from you already. Not dramatically, not with a notice or a phone call or a meeting with HR. Quietly, methodically, and at a pace that accelerates every single quarter, the economic value of your labor is being redistributed, not destroyed. Redistributed. That is the part most people miss entirely. The money does not vanish when a machine replaces a human task. It moves. It flows upward, cleanly and silently, to the people who own the machine. And if you do not own any part of that machine, you are standing on the wrong side of the largest wealth transfer your generation will ever witness. That transfer is not coming. It is already moving. It has been moving for years. The mechanism driving it is so embedded in daily life that most people interact with it a dozen times before noon without ever recognizing what it is costing them. The question this chapter answers is not whether automation will affect you. It will. The question is whether that effect will make you poorer or richer. Who will you be when it does? That question, the one hanging in the air from the last chapter, is not philosophical. It is financial. And the answer depends almost entirely on one distinction you are about to understand. Think about the year 1810. A textile mill in northern England is humming with newly installed power looms. Hundreds of hand weavers in the surrounding towns are watching their income collapse in real time. The machines are faster, cheaper, and tireless. The weavers are skilled, experienced, and utterly replaceable overnight. Their craft, which had taken years to master, was worth less on a Tuesday than it had been on a Monday. Not because of their effort, not because of their character. The machines simply arrived. Some of those weavers rioted. They broke into factories and smashed looms in an act of fury that history recorded as the Luddite movement. Their anger was completely understandable. Their strategy was completely wrong, because the looms kept running. And the mill owners kept collecting. Here is what nobody told the weavers. Here is what nobody told their children or their grandchildren or most of your parents. The machine was not the enemy. Owning nothing was the enemy. Now hold that thought. We will come back to the mill owners in a moment, because the line from 1810 to 2025 is shorter and straighter than you have been led to believe. Today the machine does not weave cotton. It writes code, screens resumes, diagnoses medical images, and drafts legal documents. It answers customer calls and generates marketing copy. It drives trucks on tested routes, processes loan applications in seconds, and handles the kind of detailed analytical work that a decade ago required a salaried professional with a graduate degree. This is not speculation about 2045. This is a description of this year, and the companies deploying these systems are not doing it reluctantly. They are doing it because every task shifted to software is a labor cost permanently removed from their expense column and permanently added to their profit margin. Profits flow to shareholders. That is not a prediction. It is the definition of how equity works. So the open loop here is this. Labor's share of corporate earnings is shrinking and capital's share is growing. Being only a laborer in this economy means sitting on the wrong side of a widening gap. Now you might be asking whether your particular job is safe, whether your field is different, whether the creative work or the human work or the specialized work you do is protected. That is a fair and important question, and this chapter will answer it, but not yet, because the more important thing to understand first is the mechanism itself. Here is how the transfer works. A company employs 40 people to handle a process that costs $2 million a year in salaries and benefits. It deploys an AI system that handles 80% of that process for $300,000 a year in licensing and compute costs. The company does not pocket that savings in a vault. It reports higher earnings per share. Higher earnings per share make the stock price rise. Rising stock prices create wealth. That wealth accumulates in the brokerage accounts and retirement funds of the people who own shares. If you own shares, some fraction of that newly created value lands in your account. If you own no shares, you receive none of it. The 40 workers received none of it. The software vendor's shareholders received some. The company's shareholders received the rest. This is not a moral argument. This is a mechanical description of how capital markets function. And the machinery runs the same whether you approve of it or not. Now, about that mill owner. A woman named Clara kept her textile mill running through 3 generations of technological change, from power looms to steam-driven machinery to early electrical systems. She did not invent any of it. She simply owned the building where the machines ran, maintained enough capital to upgrade when the technology changed, and collected the income that the machines produced. Her workers received wages. She received a portion of everything the machines made for the rest of her life. When she died, she transferred that ownership to her children, along with the compounding head start it represented. Her workers transferred their wages, which had largely been spent on living expenses, to their children. 2 families, same town, same era, completely different economic trajectories. Not because of intelligence, not because of virtue, because of ownership. The pattern has not changed. Only the machines have changed. Think about the last 3 years of your own life for a moment. Think about the money that moved through your hands in that time. Think about where it went. Think about how much of it was exchanged for your time and spent before it could become anything else. Think about what percentage of your net worth today is owned outright by you, a share in something that earns while you sleep. That appreciates while you are at dinner. That works the midnight shift without clocking in. If that number is low, this is not a character flaw. It is a structural gap between where you are and where you need to be. And the window to close that gap is narrowing in a way that is specific to this decade. Here is the urgency spike. By 2030, analysts across multiple research institutions estimate that somewhere between 15 and 30% of current job tasks in developed economies will be partially or fully automated. Not whole jobs eliminated overnight. Tasks extracted, efficiency increased, headcount frozen or reduced. This compression will show up first in the labor market as stagnant wages for broad categories of knowledge work. Not pink slips, just a ceiling that arrives quietly in the form of no raises, contract work replacing full-time roles, and teams of 3 doing what 5 people did in 2022. The workers below that ceiling will work just as hard. They will simply earn a smaller share of the total value being created. That value does not disappear. It moves. And here, finally, is the revelation this chapter has been building toward. If you own a share of the machine replacing your labor, displacement becomes dividend. Read that again. If you own a share of the machine replacing your labor, displacement becomes dividend. The same force that threatens your income as a worker can become a source of income as an owner. You do not have to build the machine. You do not have to invent the algorithm. You simply have to hold a piece of the entity that does. A broad index fund that includes the major technology and AI infrastructure companies is not a passive bet on stock market luck. It is a claim on the productivity of every machine those companies deploy, every labor cost they eliminate, every efficiency gain they monetize. You are buying a seat at the table where the savings from automation flow. This is what the mill workers in 1810 could not have easily done. They had no mechanism for small-scale ownership. Capital markets for ordinary people barely existed, but you have a brokerage account that you can open in under 10 minutes. You have fractional shares available on investments that once required thousands of dollars to enter. You have index funds that put you inside the earnings stream of hundreds of companies simultaneously, for an expense ratio small enough to be nearly invisible. The infrastructure for participation exists. It has existed for years. The only thing that has not been fully distributed is the understanding of what is actually at stake. Now about your job and the question of whether your work is protected. Here is the honest answer. Some of it is, and some of it is not. And that proportion will shift faster than any career planning system is currently accounting for. The point is not to terrify you. The point is to show you that placing your entire economic future in the column of labor income, as though that income is permanent and rising, is the same mistake the hand weavers made. They were not lazy. They were not unaware. They simply assumed the economic ground under their feet was stable because it had been stable for their parents. The ground under your feet is moving. That is not a metaphor. It is the most literal description of what is happening in labor markets right now. A little later, we arrive at an argument about the safety of high-skill careers that runs straight against the usual belief. Once that lands, it reshapes the very first financial decision you make each month. For now, fix this single idea in place. The closing window is not just about real estate, not just about inflation, not just about interest rates and generational wealth gaps. It is about the structure of how income gets generated in an automated economy. Workers receive wages. Owners receive returns. The automation wave does not change this logic. It accelerates it. And every year that passes with you sitting entirely in the worker column is another year of compounding cost, compounding quietly, invisibly, in the gap between what you earn and what the machines are earning for the people who own them. The window is open now. The question is whether you will step through it before the machines finish their shift. Chapter 11. Your network is a balance sheet entry. Saving harder will not close the wealth gap. That sounds like the advice of someone who gave up on discipline. It is not. It is a factual observation about how wealth actually moves in the world, not through the sweat of individuals working alone, but through channels built between people who know things, see things, and share access with each other. The harder you work in isolation, the more efficiently you produce results that stay exactly where they are. This chapter is about the thing that multiplies those results. It is about the people around you, and why proximity to the right ones is not a social luxury. It is a line item on your financial statement that either compounds in your favor or slowly drains what you are working so hard to build. Here is the question you probably have not asked yourself lately. Who was in the last conversation that changed what you thought was possible for your own finances? If you are struggling to answer, this chapter was written for you. Think about two people. Both are 29. Both earn roughly the same salary. Both spend carefully and put a little aside each month. One of them knows a woman named Dara who works at a venture-backed startup. Through Dara, that person hears about an employee referral for a role that pays 40% more. They also meet Dara's colleague Marcus at a small dinner. Marcus mentions a syndicate that pools capital for real estate deals too small for institutional buyers, but too large for a single individual. No press release announced that deal. No algorithm surfaced it. Marcus mentioned it over food because he trusted the room. The other 29-year-old, equally disciplined, equally hardworking, goes home that same night to a savings app and deposits another $80. Both people are doing the right things. Only one of them is operating inside a network that compounds. That contrast is not about luck. It is about financial surface area. The total space your money and attention can actually touch. Surface area expands when you are near people who carry information, deals, and access. It contracts when your social world is sealed around people whose relationship with money looks exactly like yours. Neither group is more virtuous, but one group is accumulating at a rate the other cannot match through savings alone, no matter the discipline. Here is the part that should disturb you a little. The transfer of wealth happening right now does not move evenly. It flows through networks. It flows through rooms. It pools among people who already knew each other before the opportunity appeared. The window is open now, but a window only helps you if you can see what is on the other side. And seeing requires being near people whose vantage point extends past your current line of sight. You are not behind because you lack intelligence or effort. You may be behind because the room you are standing in is the wrong size. Hold that open for a moment, because the answer is not simply meet more people. That instruction is useless the same way eat better is useless without knowing what better means. We will come back to what the right room actually looks like, and why most people who try to enter it make a very specific mistake that closes the door before they are through it. Consider a man named Conrad. Conrad grew up in a mid-sized city, first in his family to graduate university, and landed a solid job in financial analysis. By 31, he was earning decent money, had no debt except a modest car payment, and was contributing to his retirement account every month. He also had no idea that two of his coworkers had quietly formed an LLC and purchased a duplex together 3 years earlier. He found out when one of them mentioned it casually in a parking lot conversation after a company meeting. Conrad asked how they did it. They told him. 2 months later, he was in a conversation with their lender. 6 months after that, Conrad was a co-owner of a small residential property generating monthly income that had nothing to do with his salary. Conrad did not find a new opportunity. He found an existing one by stepping into a conversation that had been happening without him. The property did not change. The lender did not change. The structure of the deal did not change. What changed was Conrad's proximity. Let that sit for a second. Most financial advice treats your relationships like background noise. Nice to have, not essential to the plan. But the plan depends on information, and information travels through people before it ever reaches a spreadsheet. By the time an opportunity is public and visible to anyone with an internet connection, the people with strong networks have already moved. They did not move because they were smarter. They moved because they heard about it in a room you were not in. Revisit your ordinary days at that point 3 years back without polishing the memory. Think about the conversations you were having, the people in your immediate circle, the rooms you walked into regularly. Now ask yourself honestly, Did any of those rooms contain someone who was operating at a financial level you have not yet reached? Did anyone in that circle have a direct line to capital, to deals, or to knowledge you were missing? If the answer is mostly no, then nothing about the last 3 years should surprise you. You compounded what was already in your environment, because that is all any of us can do. The question is what you choose to put in that environment going forward. This is the revelation the chapter was built to deliver. The people around you do not just affect your mood or your motivation. They set the ceiling on your financial imagination. When everyone you know earns in a certain range, thinks in a certain range, borrows and saves and invests in a certain range, your sense of what is normal calcifies around that range. You stop noticing it. It becomes the air. And when a deal or an idea or an opportunity appears that exists outside that range, you do not even register it as real. It feels like something that happens to other people, people on podcasts, people who started with advantages you were not given. But the people on the podcasts were once just people in a different room. Proximity is compounding. Say that plainly. Every month you spend in a wealth-adjacent network, your knowledge base grows, your deal flow grows, your access grows. Every month you spend in a sealed social world, the gap between where you are and where you could be is not staying still. It is widening, quietly, without ceremony. The same way wealth redistributes without an announcement. Now back to the mistake Conrad almost made. When he first heard about his coworker's property, his instinct was to go home and research the market himself. Spend 3 weeks reading reports, build a spreadsheet, come back with a well-formed plan. He nearly did exactly that. A mentor he had met at an industry event stopped him. She said, "Lead with contribution before you lead with questions." If you approach a network as someone who wants to extract value, the door closes. If you approach as someone who brings something, a contact, a piece of research, a skill, even just genuine attention and follow-through, the door opens wider over time. This is where most people fail when they try to upgrade their circles. They show up transactional. They have the energy of someone interviewing the room for what it can offer them. Experienced people feel this immediately. The network equivalent of compound interest requires trust, and trust requires a track record of giving before you receive. Start smaller than you think you need to. One person at a higher level than your current ceiling, cultivated with patience and real contribution, is worth more than 50 surface-level connections who do nothing but reflect your existing knowledge back at you. Further on, we arrive at an argument about risk that runs straight against the usual belief. When that becomes clear, it reshapes who you are willing to become. But for now, stay with this. Your network is not a social accessory. It is infrastructure. Think of it the way you would think of a road system. A city with no roads can have tremendous resources buried in the ground and never access them. A city with excellent roads moves goods, people, and capital efficiently between points. You are the city. Your relationships are the roads. The wealth that is moving right now, the generational transfer, the redistribution, it travels on roads. If your roads do not connect to where the movement is happening, none of it reaches you. Not because you were excluded, but because infrastructure does not route through empty space. The closing window metaphor has appeared throughout this book because it is real. The window is the window of generational opportunity that opens when wealth transfers from one generation to the next. But there is a second window inside the first one, and it is often missed. It is the window of network building. Networks take time. They do not respond well to panic or urgency. You cannot sprint your way into trusted relationships at 39 the way you can build them steadily from 27 to 32. The compounding only works if you start while the base is still small enough for early effort to create disproportionate leverage. You are at that point now, or near enough to it that the decisions you make this week carry real weight. Who you spend time with, what events you attend, what conversations you initiate. These decisions will not be visible for months, but they will be undeniable in 3 years. 2 people, same salary, same discipline, one in a room where information moves. One in a room where information does not arrive until it is already priced in. That difference is not destiny. It is a decision. The people around you are either expanding your financial surface area or quietly shrinking it, and the shrinking never makes a sound. Chapter 12. Stop thinking like someone who saves. Every civilization that has ever accumulated lasting wealth has discovered the same quiet dividing line, not between the rich and the poor, not between the educated and the unschooled. The line runs between 2 different ways of seeing the world, 2 fundamentally different questions that people ask when they hold money in their hands. In every era, across every culture, a small group of people asked one question and the rest asked another. The group that asked the right question built things that outlasted them. The group that asked the wrong question worked hard their entire lives and died with just enough. You are holding money right now, or you are about to. The question you bring to that moment will determine more about your financial future than any interest rate, any tax bracket, or any market condition ever could. This chapter is about which question you have been asking, and about the cost of asking the wrong one for too long. The people around you are either expanding your financial surface area or quietly shrinking it, and the shrinking never makes a sound. That line is worth sitting with before moving forward, because it points to something deeper than environment. It points to identity. The people around you behave the way they do because of who they believe themselves to be, and so do you. The question is whether who you believe yourself to be is currently working for you or quietly against you. Here is the open loop, the thing that will not make complete sense until later in this chapter. There is a version of financial responsibility that looks exactly like wisdom from the outside but functions like a trap on the inside. It has a name most people would never consider threatening. It is called saving. Now stay with that. The point is not that saving is bad. The point is something more precise and more uncomfortable than that. Call up your ordinary days at that point 3 years back without polishing the memory. Not in terms of your bank balance, in terms of how you thought about money. What were the questions you asked yourself when you received a paycheck, a bonus, a tax refund? Did you think about what to cut? Did you calculate how much you could put away without feeling the pain? Did you feel a small sense of pride when the balance in your savings account went up, even slightly? That feeling of pride is real. It is not wrong, but ask yourself honestly whether that pride was accompanied by a plan, or whether the act of saving itself had quietly become the plan. That is the trap, and millions of people are currently living inside it. Marcus worked as a logistics coordinator for 8 years. He was not reckless. He did not buy things he could not afford. He tracked his expenses in a spreadsheet every Sunday night. By the time he was 31, he had saved just under $19,000. He was proud of this number and reasonably so. But Marcus had a habit he had never examined. Every time he thought about doing something with that money, he asked the same question. How much of this can I afford to lose? The question felt responsible. It felt like the voice of reason speaking over impulse. So he asked it every time. Every time the answer came back cautious. Every time Marcus moved the money back into the account where it sat still and silent. 5 years later, Marcus had $23,000. He had also watched 2 people he grew up with buy rental properties. One of them now earned more per month from those properties than Marcus earned at work. Marcus was not less intelligent. He was not less disciplined. He had simply been answering the wrong question for a very long time. The question was the trap. Savers ask, "How much can I keep?" Owners ask, "How much can I deploy?" Read that again slowly, because those 2 questions do not just produce different answers, they produce different people. The saver's question is defensive by design. It positions money as something fragile, something that needs protecting from the world, including from you. The owner's question is generative. It assumes that money is a tool, and that tools are meant to be used, and that using them well produces more tools. One question makes you a guardian. The other makes you a builder. You have been trained to be a guardian, not by malice, by repetition. The financial advice most people grow up hearing is almost entirely about protection. Save for a rainy day. Do not spend what you do not have. Live below your means. These are not false ideas, but they are incomplete ones. They describe how to survive financial difficulty. They do not describe how to build financial position. And there is a difference between surviving and building that does not resolve itself over time. It widens. Here is the window that is closing. Right now, in the years approaching 2030, there is a transfer of assets happening at a scale that most working people do not have a clear picture of. Property, equity, private stakes, and accumulated capital are moving, quietly and legally, from those who held it into the hands of those who are positioned to receive it. Not evenly, not randomly, into the hands of people who have already made the identity shift from saver to owner. The window is not closed yet, but it is not wide open either. And every year you spend asking how much you can keep is a year the transfer moves without you. That is not meant to frighten you. It is meant to clarify the stakes, because here is the hope that sits underneath the pressure. The shift does not require a larger income. It does not require a financial degree, a wealthy relative, or a perfect credit score. It requires a change in the question you bring to money. That is it. One question, asked consistently and carried forward into action. The identity of an owner is not given to you by the size of your account. It is chosen. You choose it by changing what you ask. Concretely, this is what that looks like. A saver receives $300 unexpectedly and asks, "Where should I put this so I do not lose it?" An owner receives $300 and asks, "What is the most productive place this can go right now?" The saver parks the money. The owner moves it. Sometimes the owner moves it into savings because savings serves a tactical purpose. It keeps powder dry for deployment, but the orientation is different. The safety is not the destination. The safety is the preparation for the next move. This is the loop closing now. The one that opened at the start of this chapter. Saving looks like wisdom, and it is when it is in service of something. But when saving is the strategy itself rather than one step inside a larger strategy, it becomes a form of financial stillness. And stillness in a market that does not stop moving is a kind of drift. You are not standing still when you save without a deployment plan. You are moving backward at the speed of inflation, quietly, without drama, without a sound. The transfer is already happening. The window is already narrowing, and you now know what separates the people passing through it from the people watching it close. The question you bring to money is who you are. Chapter 13. The passenger finally takes the wheel. You already know you are not the same person who opened this book. Something shifted, maybe gradually. maybe in a single sentence somewhere in these pages that landed harder than you expected. But here you are at chapter 13, and that fact alone means something. Most people who pick up a book like this put it down by chapter 3. They return to their routine, their comfortable fog, their sense that someday will arrive on its own schedule. You did not do that. So before anything else, notice that. Notice what it required of you to stay in the room this long. And now the harder question. Knowing what you know, feeling what you feel at this exact moment, are you going to do anything different? Not eventually. Not after the next paycheck, the next quarter, the next year that feels more stable. Now, the answer to that question is not a matter of information. You have the information. The answer is a matter of who you have decided to be when the book closes. That is where this chapter lives. And it does not offer comfort before it offers truth. The question you bring to money is who you are. That line ended the last chapter, and it is exactly the right place to begin this one. At a practical, daily level, every choice you make about where your money goes is a vote cast for a version of yourself. Not a metaphor, a literal, binding, compounding vote. The person who defers every savings decision is not waiting for the right moment. That person is voting, clearly and repeatedly, for the version of themselves who never quite starts. You have been voting for a while now. Bring to mind your ordinary days at that point 3 years back, without polishing the memory. Think about the version of you who existed at that exact moment. The concerns that felt enormous. The things you were certain you needed to figure out before you could move. Now ask yourself honestly, how much of what you were waiting to resolve has actually changed? How much of the delay was real, and how much was a story you told yourself so fluently that it stopped feeling like a story at all? This is the mirror moment, not to shame you, to locate you. This book started with an image. You asleep in the back of a moving vehicle, a passenger, unaware of the direction, the speed, or how close you were getting to the exit you needed. The vehicle was the economy. The transfer was already underway. Wealth was already moving, quietly and without announcement, from those who were not paying attention to those who were. And you were asleep. That image was the opening of everything. Here is what that chapter could not yet tell you because you had not earned it yet. A passenger who wakes up is not automatically the driver. Waking up is only the first move. You can open your eyes, see exactly where the vehicle is headed, understand the speed, feel the urgency in your chest, and still not reach for the wheel. Still sit in the back seat, wide awake and motionless, watching the exit approach, aware, informed, paralyzed. There is a specific kind of person who reads books like this one and feels everything deeply and changes almost nothing. They are not unintelligent. They are not lazy in any simple sense. They can describe the problem with precision. They can articulate the window, the transfer, the compounding nature of inaction. And when you ask them why they have not moved, they will tell you something is still not ready. They are waiting for certainty before they act. They do not realize that certainty is only granted in retrospect and only to people who already moved. Awareness without action is just informed passivity. Hold that. Do not let it slide past. The window is still open. Right now, as you listen to this sentence, it is open. But the window does not wait for you to finish processing. It does not pause while you get more comfortable with the idea. The transfer continues. Every day that the window is open and you are standing still is a day that someone else is walking through it. Here is a story about a woman named Petra. Petra was 31 years old and worked as a project coordinator for a logistics company in a mid-sized city. She had read 3 books about personal finance in 2 years. She could explain the difference between a Roth and a traditional account. She understood index funds. She had a spreadsheet, actually a beautiful spreadsheet, with projected scenarios and color-coded columns. But she had not invested a single dollar outside of her employer's default contribution, which was set at 3% and had never been adjusted. The spreadsheet was the problem, not because it was wrong, because it had become a substitute for action. Every time the anxiety about money rose in her chest, she would open the spreadsheet and adjust a number. She would watch the projected totals shift, feel a brief sense of control, and close it again. The planning was real. The feeling of progress was real. The progress was not. One afternoon, a colleague of hers, a woman named Dana who had no spreadsheet and no system Petra would have recognized as rigorous, mentioned offhandedly that she had been putting 20% of her pay into a broad market fund for 4 years. Not because she had figured everything out, because she had decided to start before she figured everything out. Petra went home and changed her contribution that night, not because she suddenly had more information, because she finally understood that she had been using information as a shield. The spreadsheet did not change. The action did. Now let the story settle for a moment. You have been building towards something across these chapters. You have looked at the window and understood its shape. You have studied the transfer and understood its speed. You have examined your relationship to money, your identity inside of wealth, the beliefs you carry that are not serving you. All of that work was real. None of it disappears, but it was preparation. It was sitting in the back seat, waking up, learning the map. This is the moment you reach for the wheel, not because you have eliminated doubt. Doubt does not leave first. Action comes first, and clarity follows it. This is one of the most misunderstood sequences in the entire architecture of personal finance. People believe they need to feel ready before they move, but readiness is not an emotional state you arrive at. It is a condition that emerges from the first irreversible action. The moment you make a real move, something in you reorganizes around that move. The identity catches up to the action, not before, after. So let the doubt be present. Bring it with you into the vehicle. Just stop letting it drive. The open question threading through this chapter deserves an answer before you move into the final pages of this book. What exactly does taking the wheel look like for the version of you that exists right now? Not the future version, not the more prepared version, this one. It looks like one decision made today that your future self will compound from. Not a plan, not a spreadsheet, not a revised intention. One decision. Transferred money, opened account, automatic contribution adjusted, first real estate inquiry sent, first business structure researched to the point of registering. One thing that makes the next thing easier. One thing that creates momentum where there was only thought. One action that tells the economy, the transfer, the closing window that you are no longer a passenger. The vehicle is still moving. The exit is still visible. The driver makes the exit. The passenger watches it pass. You have 12 chapters of understanding in you now. The only thing left to answer is whether you are going to stay in the back seat with a perfect view of everything you did not do, or place your hands on something real and steer. The final chapter will not be about strategy. It will be about what it means to actually cross a threshold and what waits on the other side of it. Chapter 14. 2030 is not a deadline, it's a mirror. There is a pattern that repeats across every generation that has ever stood at the edge of a great economic shift. The people who recognized the shift were not, as a rule, the smartest people in the room. They were not born into wealth or handed a map. What they shared was something quieter than intelligence and more durable than luck. They made a single private decision, a decision that looked small from the outside. They stopped treating their own future as something that would arrange itself. Every era has this moment. Every era produces the people who moved and the people who waited. You are living inside one of those moments right now. And everything that follows in the next few minutes is going to ask you one question, not about the market, not about the economy, not about 2030. It is going to ask you what you actually believe about yourself. That is the question this entire book has been circling, and this is where it lands. The previous chapter told you that what comes next would not be about strategy. That was a promise, and this chapter intends to keep it. You have heard the strategies, 13 chapters of them. You have heard about the transfer of wealth, the closing window, the asset gap widening in real time while most people scroll past it without recognition. You know the mechanics now. You understand what is moving and why, and roughly when the window narrows to the point where catching up requires extraordinary effort instead of ordinary discipline. That knowledge lives in you now. It cannot be taken back. But here is what has been quietly true this entire time. The closing window was never only about the market. Go back to your ordinary days at that point 3 years back without polishing the memory. Not financially, deeper than that. Think about how you talked to yourself when a real opportunity appeared. Think about whether you trusted your own judgment enough to act on what you saw. Or whether you waited for more certainty, more permission, more proof that you were the kind of person this opportunity was meant for. Think honestly. Most people who miss financial windows do not miss them for lack of information. They miss them because somewhere beneath the surface, they do not fully believe the window is open for them. They believe it is open for other people, people with better starts, better networks, more natural confidence. They watch from the side of the road, not because they lack ambition, because they have not yet made the private decision. That decision is what this chapter is about. There is a woman named 𝗡𝗢𝗧. She grew up in a mid-sized city, the daughter of a postal worker and a school administrator. Nothing wrong with that life. Nothing easy about it either. By the time 𝗡𝗢𝗧 was 29, she had a decent job and a savings account that hovered around $400 no matter how much she put into it. She had also developed a habit over years, a habit of reading about wealth, studying wealth, admiring wealth in other people, without ever taking the step that would make her a participant in it rather than a spectator. She knew the information. She had read the books. She could explain compound interest at a dinner party in a way that made people nod. But she had never opened a brokerage account, never set up an automatic contribution, never bought a single share of anything, never put $1 into a vehicle that worked while she slept. If you had asked her why, she would have given you a practical answer. Not enough money, not the right time, waiting until she understood it better. All reasonable, all true in a surface way. And all underneath, a story she was telling herself. A story built to protect against one specific fear, that she would try and it would not work for her. That wealth building was something that worked for other people, that she would discover painfully that she was the exception. One afternoon, she opened an account anyway, not because her situation had changed, because she decided to stop waiting for certainty that she deserved to try. 14 months later, 𝗡𝗢𝗧 had more money invested than she had ever held in her life. For the first time, money was moving in a direction she had chosen rather than one that had chosen her. The strategy was not the hard part. The decision was the hard part. You have been reading this book, or listening to it, inside a version of that same quiet tension. The open loop beneath every chapter, the one this book has not named until now, is this. Information is never the bottleneck. People who know how wealth is built and still do not build it are not failing at strategy. They are failing at the one thing that precedes every strategy: the private act of deciding that they are worth the investment, that the future they want is not naive or greedy or out of reach, that the window is open for them too. The transfer is already happening. It was happening in Chapter 1. It is happening right now as you listen to this. Somewhere today, a pool of wealth is moving from passive hands to active ones. From people who delayed to people who decided. From the sleeping passenger to the person who holds the wheel. You have held the wheel for 13 chapters. The question is whether you hold it after the last sentence ends. 2030 is not a threat. It never was. It is a mirror. When you look at a deadline and feel urgency, what you are actually feeling is the reflection of your own belief about what is still possible for you. People who feel no urgency about 2030 are not more relaxed. They are more resigned. They have quietly decided, somewhere along the way, that the future is a thing that happens to them rather than a thing they build. The deadline does not create that feeling. It reveals it, and you can change what the mirror shows. Not by thinking differently, that is too abstract to be useful. By doing one specific thing in the next 48 hours. One thing that proves to your nervous system, not just your intellect, that you are a participant and not a spectator. Open the account if it is not open. Fund it with whatever you have right now, not what you wish you had, what you actually have. Set one automatic contribution, even if it is $25. Write down on paper or in a note on your phone the single financial position you want to hold by the end of this year. Not a dream, a specific, nameable position. Then tell one person in your life what you are building, not to ask permission, to make it real in the world outside your head. That is the action. 48 hours. One account, one contribution, one written position, one person who knows. It will feel smaller than you expect. That smallness is the point. Massive first moves are almost always fantasies built to avoid the embarrassment of starting modestly. Modest and real beats massive and imaginary every time. The transfer does not wait for you to be ready. It is already happening. And what you do in the next 2 days is the answer to the only question this entire book has been asking. The real closing window was never the market. It was the moment you decided you were worth investing in. That moment is right now.